The idea that he took on one summer was what happens in this type of a system. Does it go into a debt liquidating depression or does it go into a hyperinflationary blow off? And what he discovered through study that whole summer on that one question was every time that the currency was not tied to gold or gold and silver, you went into a inflationary blow off. If it was tied to gold, like in the 30s, you could go into a debt liquidating depression, which is what the 30s was. They could print money to infinity. All they really care about is, can you make the interest payment? Because if you can't make the interest payment or not, guess what, Venezuela? We get your oil. Guess what, Argentina? We get your silver. Guess what, Mexico? We get your oil. If it were me and I was an advisor to the BRICS, I would not tie it to gold until it was necessary to tie it to gold, which would be after the dollar was on its, in the emergency room on life support. When the dollar goes to life support, then I'd probably say, okay, we're trading these currencies, but additional to that, we have make up a name that's going to be gold backed. And that will be for stability purposes. Kind of like what happened at Bretton Woods. Usually these type of events go to an acceleration phase. And that's where I've said, you get 90% of the move in the last 10% of the time. I think we've entered the acceleration phase. If this market started in 2000, as I indicated, it's 25 years old now. What's 10% of that? 2.5 years. I think we're in that part of the scenario where we're looking at a couple years further.
I'm your host, Fazan Irani. Let's connect the dots. Our guest today is David Morgan, one of the world's most trusted voices on precious metals and macroeconomics, and the silent storm building beneath the financial system. With over 4 decades of experience, he publishes the Morgan Report, has authored the Silver Manifesto, and is frequently featured on major media outlets and financial documentaries, including the Four Horsemen film. Welcome, David. It's such a pleasure to have you on our show.
Farzin, thank you for having me.
Hey, it's always a pleasure. I love interviewing guests from around the world, and I start off with one particular question. David, how did you get started in the markets, and how did you get to where you are right now?
Well, a couple real quick points. I was an 11-year-old kid when the coinage in the United States changed from 90% silver coins to the what I call Johnson slugs, the pot metal coins that we've had since 1965 onward. Of course, the copper penny existed for a while, and that's even been taken away. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call. And then I just, for whatever reason, was just interested as could be in the financial system. How does this big thing work? How do you go from owning a house to building a skyscraper? How do you build, a football stadium for the community? I just didn't. And so I started learning. And I was 16, I started trading stocks, which is below the legal requirement. But you can do that. I just bugged my dad and he looked into it. And in California, I don't know if it even exists anymore, but there's the Uniform Gift to Minors Act. Your parents signed a piece of paper with the state and said it's okay. My son's got his own money, he can trade stocks at 16. So I started trading the stock market when I was a 16-year-old kid. And that was my passion. I got kind of moved off of that. Told my dad I kind of wanted to do that for a living. He kind of blew up. It's a long story. I won't bore you. And asked me, well, what else would you do? And I said, well, I'd fly, So I started flying at age 16, as well as trading stocks. And I went into the aircraft industry and had quite a run in the aircraft industry. But the whole time I was in it, full time, I was part-time doing, what I do with the silver, gold markets, the stock market, the markets in general. That was my fascination.
You could never bore us telling us about your background, but thanks for sharing that much in a nutshell. David, I believe we're living in some interesting times, as the Chinese would say. So, obviously, where would you like to set the scene for our audience today? Obviously, we'll go. You are called the Silver Guru for a reason, and we will go there. But where would you like to set the scene for our audience today about the big macro picture? What's your thesis?
Sure. Well, first of all, the Silver Guru, I mean, I've maybe there's been a few times I've earned that title. I don't know. It's up for the public to decide that, not me. But I did it more or less with tongue in cheek. I was just trying to come up with, you know, not my name and something that people could remember, and I chose that, and then it stuck. But anyway, yeah, the big picture. I mean, I've been worried about it ever since I was a young man because I realized and learned, studied on my own about a fractional reserve banking system, fiat currencies, and what happens in the long run. Well, it really kind of gave me the gut punch. The one that made me feel it deeply was, from what I could understand, it's the first time where it's been a global event. I mean, you could say the Roman Empire was, but even in the fall of the Roman Empire, Rome fell, but Eastern Rome didn't. You know, it continued on, the Eastern Empire. But regardless, I was concerned and still am about where this living a lie leads us because you can't get something for nothing, yet the elite bankers can put, they can put computer entries into the beast computer and come out with more cash and use it appropriately and send it to their banking buddies and on and on. I don't know where your people are. Some will understand what I just said. Some are just learning. But once I learned the system is a get something for nothing system that starts at the top and trickles down to the general population, I knew it was illegitimate. And now it's a worldwide problem and it's going to end badly, or let's say there'll be some pain involved. And we'll get through it because this has happened again and again throughout history. We're just seeing it on a larger scale.
You're right. It's happened. It's happened before. But David, if you don't mind me asking, for me, the seminal moment working in banking was during the global financial crisis. And even though I was in commercial corporate banking, I was in the banking world. I had an MBA and I had degrees, but I didn't understand the financial system at all. And that's when I went digging and I understood they purposely didn't teach us that. Was there a seminal moment for yourself where you kind of thought, how come nobody else understands this system? As in the central banks creating money out of thin air and the banks as well. Was there something that actually woke you up to that fact?
Yeah, I mean, I woke myself up really with the, silver coinage as a kid. I said, well, wait a minute. Why would you not have precious metals as the medium of exchange? And if it isn't, what does that mean? So, I learned a lot of this stuff on my own before I ever got in. Because my first degree was engineering. I didn't have any finance background. And then other than self study, which is quite extensive actually. So yeah, I caught on to the Austrian school in my, search. And this is of course before the internet. So I had to go to the library and, there were various means of getting information, but I dug in. And so when I did get my degree in business finance, I had a lot of knowledge outside of what they had been taught. So I had some pretty good back and forth with some of the professors about how the cow eats the cabbage and how you can't print wealth indefinitely and a lot of things that you've learned. So I already had that. It's just because I am who I am. I mean, I'm not trying to take any extra credit. It's just, we have a passion in life and people have it in sports and art and music. I mean, there's a lot of just so awesome people out there that are quote unquote doing their thing, right? And that was my thing. My thing was just figuring out how does this and why do we even have bankers? And I mean, questions that nobody asks. I bring these
Why
stuff
do
up
we
and
even
I,
have bankers? Exactly right. I think that's an important question. Why do we have bankers? Because I've asked this question. I think I was interviewing Matthew Piepenberg, and I kind of threw in the question in there where I said, why do governments need to borrow from why do we need to issue bonds? Why do governments need to issue bonds and why do central banks buy them? Why do we have a Federal Reserve? What is your view? Why do we have a Federal Reserve in the US? Because obviously you're in the USA. Obviously, the Fed is the problem. Some people are trying to say end the Fed. And Dr. Ron Paul's been a big proponent of that as well. What's your view of the Fed, and is that obviously playing a big part in society in the USA?
Well, my view of the Fed is it's illegal. It's not constitutional. I also believe upon further study that it was enacted in like the 24th of December, 1913, without the appropriate amount of voting taking place to pass it into law. So I think it's illegal from the basis of it's unconstitutional. I don't think it was actually correctly brought in per their own rules, but that's, that is not easily proven. But I'm more aligned with, well, let me back up for a moment, Farzin, and say that I'm doing or completed a documentary. You can see it. It'll be launched here by the end of this month. It's at silversunrise.tv. And in that documentary, it goes into the fear, stress, and control that money has over our lives and ways to mitigate that. So going on that basis, Ellen Brown, who's a friend of mine that wrote The Web of Debt and other books, she looks at banking in a way that I agree with. And that is maybe we do need banking, but we don't need bankers. What do I mean? It should be, in her words, and I'm parroting them, it should be a public utility. It should be a situation where there's this building and they transfer and store wealth. So let's say we're back on gold and silver, for example, and people get paid by hosting the community service that everyone needs, because money is the most efficient way to divide labor. If you're really good at podcasting and whatever, you get paid in money because if you're a farmer and you've got apples and I've got too many apples, I don't want to trade you. I mean, all this stuff. I'm just saying it's just as basics for the audience. Well, I think we do need some banks, but just think. And now I want to digress a moment more for the community, for your listeners. There are two documentaries out there. One is called The Bank of Dave. As far as I know, it's only on Netflix. I've watched it. Very good movie. And this gentleman, Dave, he's in the UK, was the first to get a new banking license from the documentary in like 150 years. And they didn't want to say no, the controllers. And so they said, okay, but you got to come up with, I forget the number, 6 million or something. He didn't have that much cash. He's a millionaire. He's loved by the townspeople, real community figure, helps people left and right, and decided that the best way to help him, because he'd loan them money and they pay him back. But anyway, started a bank, and it's a community bank. The profits go into the community. They build up the food bank. They improve the parks. They add to healthcare services. That's what banking could be, but that's a stark example of like one in thousands that work that way, and a lot of them like you didn't know, you've got numbers, you're taught a certain thing, got a degree, you're smart, but you don't really know the puppet masters at the top and how they're controlling everything. And it's not to your benefit. You're just getting a paycheck. So that would be my take. I think we need to have transactions between us that mitigates the division of labor in the most efficient way to do it, and that's money. But who controls the money should be us. We control the money. You go to a bank and they get paid a reasonable salary for a public service. And that's what it should be. It shouldn't be a controlled mechanism that really stresses our lives, controls our lives. How many marriages are out there and they're fighting over finances, or a guy's going to a job he hates, but he knows he probably can't get paid that much anywhere else and he's scared to quit? I mean, that's all over the place. And then you have people nowadays working two jobs and they can't make ends meet because inflation's so high. It was a very sad situation. It's one that I know ahead of time because I've studied monetary history, and this is what happens at the end of these great inflations. You end up really hurting the people. The bankers really don't care. What they do is they remark the price, then what we would call in the bank is just a mark to market, so that, $2 million building comes out at $500,000. Well, guess who prints the money? They do. So they buy it, you know. The bankers don't lose very often, is what I'm saying.
They never do. Even during the 2008 global financial crisis, none of them went to jail. And this is what we say is, I mentioned it quite a few times, they're too big to fail and too big to jail. Supposedly they get a slap on the wrist, a few $100 million in fines. That's just the cost of doing business for the big banks, and they don't care. They pay the fee and they carry on. But David, there's something you mentioned in there, which I think some of my audience will understand now, because I also get interviewed on a show in New Zealand, and I've been spreading this message for the last 2.5 years, where I've shared with the audience, and most of them did not understand how the banking system itself works, because whether it's the regulators or whether it's the politicians, they don't seem to tell people the truth. They call banks deposit takers, and they pretend like they take in deposits and they lend those same deposits out. But I've tried to highlight to people 10,000 times, there's this thing called fractional reserve banking, where the bank could just multiply your dollars out of thin air and lend it to you. And that is why they need to lend more into the economy and charge interest, because the money doesn't exist. If we had bank runs tomorrow, the banks would all go bust. What's your view on, is the central bank more at fault, or do you think the actual banks are at fault? Because banks have existed forever. Central banks more so is a new invention after the 1930s. I know America had a couple before that. But do you think central banks to blame more, or do you think the banks should hold more responsibility?
That's a tough one. The way I would answer it this way, it's probably indirect from what you've asked me, but I think it's, first of all, a lack of education. I mean, as you said, very few people really understand how the system works. And so unless you have knowledge of the problem, you can't solve the problem. So is it the central banks or is it the banks? Well, I would say it's more that the problem is that when the scam is caught on, that there's only $1 on deposit for every $9 that are loaned out. Now you're going to have a bank run as long as people wake up to that. So now you've proven it's a farce. I deposited, my money. I want my money out of the bank. We go, see that movie at Christmas every year. It's a Wonderful Life. And, they have I don't know if you're familiar with that movie, but it brings this scenario to a head that, hey, I want my money back out of the bank. And the bankers say, well, wait a minute, that money that you put in is in Fred's house. And the money that Fred gave me for the business, that's in John's new warehouse. And, it's explaining how, you know, how the bankers would explain it. But so central banks are there to make sure that if there is a banking problem, they'll take care of it. Big Daddy is there to come to the rescue no matter how insolvent they are. So if there is that bank run, the central bank says, well, we'll just print up whatever we need and make the problem go away, which is what happened in the 2007 and 8 financial crisis that you're so familiar with. And in a free market, honest to God economy where the principles that we all think we adhere to don't get swept aside and really takes place, which means a massive readjustment in the financial system. Those unprofitable go out of business. What a concept. The actual idea of capitalism is that you have the right to succeed, but it doesn't mitigate the right to fail. Because in a free market capitalistic system that actually exists, it doesn't exist anymore, but it exists ideology wise. That means the market says if you're a failure or a success. So if you come out with XYZ widget and everybody buys it, you're successful. Society improves because they think they're getting something better with that widget. Widget, folks, is just a term used in business school for a product. So that's what I'm talking about. So I thought it's a way to just think in different ways. So if we have a system and I invent a better widget, then that one that was so popular goes out of business because mine is superior in performance and it costs less. That's true free market capitalism. And then if you have an idea of a restaurant and it's not popular, you'll go out of business. You will lose money. You will go out of business, but it's the market telling you, it's a signal from the universe, if you will, that your idea might be good for you, but the market doesn't like it. And that's how you get a stable society, a stable system is those that fail and are supposed to fail, fail, and those that succeed, succeed. And you can have success for a long time and then it goes away. I mean, look at the Best Buy. You go down and get a DVD. You used to get VHS tapes, and then you went to DVDs. So that wasn't too hard to mitigate. You wholesale the tapes out to someone that thinks tapes are going on forever and they're not. You wholesale them out and get as much capital back as you can. When you start buying DVDs, then your shelves look different. So I have packages that big. Now they're that big. But then the DVDs go away because everything goes to streaming. Now you're out of business. So, and that's the way things go. Why? Because streaming is faster, more cost efficient. I don't have to get off my big butt to get down to the store to get a piece of hard commodity. I can just use my computer. So I'm off on a tangent. But the point is, central banks are there for one purpose, to save the banks. So if I was going to point to one or the other, I would say it's the central banks because they're the big brothers. They know what's going on. The little bankers, a lot of them don't know, as you know. I mean, your branch manager probably doesn't know what you know now, and he's still working at the bank.
Yeah, of course. They don't. It's called segregation of duties. Plus, they never tell you how banking works. And it's even senior executives in the bank don't know the concept of money creation and how money is created. I learned that years back from Dr. Richard Werner about how they put the mortgage documents on the asset side of the balance sheet and just create magic money out of thin air. And as you mentioned there, that was a good point, David, because if a bank did the wrong thing, they should deserve to go out of business. But again, they're the shareholders of the central bank. Most people don't even understand that. So the setup of central reserve to central bank to bail them out in case of the wrong business, which you mentioned. Hey, we move towards the governments and what they're doing. Obviously, I understand public debt isn't growth; it's a burden on the citizen and on society. And the U.S. government seems to be spending a lot of money. In fact, they're in debt by about 37 trillion. And as we speak, the US government has just shut down as of yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. What's your view on the US government being able to get out of this debt problem, or it's just 2 minutes to midnight?
It's 2 minutes to midnight. There's really no way to get out of a debt this large. It's a friend of mine that's very studied and taught me a lot, and I think he's learned things from me as well. But the idea that he took on one summer was what happens in this type of a system. Does it go into a debt liquidating depression or does it go into a hyperinflationary blow off? And what he discovered through study that whole summer on that one question was every time that the currency was not tied to gold or gold and silver, you went into a inflationary blow off. If it was tied to gold, like in the 30s, you could go into a debt liquidating depression, which is what the 30s was. Money became more valuable, but the money was gold. They revalued gold and try to boost the system that way. But even by boosting the system that way, it still didn't really get them out of the problem. The problem of the Great Depression, and there's different views on this, and I've heard most of them. But my take is that it was World War II that really brought us, meaning the United States, out of the Great Depression. So it's a very sad situation when you wake up to it. Not that we can't do better, we can, but there's got to be truth in the system. And to pretend that we could get something for nothing is the biggest lie ever told. As I like to say, I don't know if I coined it or not, doesn't matter. I think it's profound, but your audience can decide. But when you can lie about money, you can lie about anything because money transcends everything. It transcends our nationalities. You're in India or New Zealand. I'm in America. We both need it. It transcends religion, sexual orientation, what sports team you like, what color is your favorite. It transcends all that stuff. No matter what part of the world you're in, unless you're, tribal situation, you need to have money in order to live. We're the only species on the planet. We've got all the stuff we need, but yet we've put into place to our detriment this controlling the mechanism that favors the very few at the top that dictate to us what we do with our labor. And with our labor, we get these tokens, and these tokens are quote unquote valuable when in reality, they're not worth much at all.
They're not just a piece of toilet paper, if you ask me. With the number 100 and the name of whatever central bank of the country you're living in. But you touched a few good points, David, there, because obviously money should be a utility. It should be something that is good for humans. And obviously it was something just to transact because of barter back in the days. It was too cumbersome. So obviously money was created first, whether it was shells and now it's paper currency. Um, so obviously it's a medium of exchange, but I remember they also used to tell us money also serves the purpose of savings. And this is where people aren't understanding. If you save in the normal fiat currency, you're actually going backwards even if you do nothing wrong, because the inflation, at least the true inflation, is higher than what even the government tells us. So we're going backwards without doing anything. Do you think people in America, especially obviously with Trump coming in, there was obviously it wasn't just inflation, but do you think the high inflationary numbers in the US had an impact on Trump coming in and people saying enough is enough? Obviously, there are other factors as well, but do you think people in the US are feeling the inflation still?
Oh yeah, people in America are definitely feeling inflation. It's apparent to top to bottom, pretty much. I mean, the rich obviously have got enough that they can weather the storm, whether gas is at 4 or 5 or 6 bucks a gallon. But the guy out there, guy and gal just working for a living, if their commute to work goes from a $4 a gallon to $6 a gallon, they look at their budget, it might not be worth driving to work, or, whatever. So it hurts everyone, some more than others. I mean, unfortunately, inflation hurts the middle class on down more than it hurts the upper middle class up. It hurts everyone. It's just living a lie, and it's something that has taken place again and again and again. And here we are, where it's global. And I want to talk a little bit about the debt. I mean, the 37 trillion is a big number. It cannot be paid off mathematically. So I just told you a moment ago that it'll probably be inflated away, which means when you give up on the currency, and no one knows when, before that happens, I truly believe a new system will be pushed on us with some type of a central bank digital currency, or maybe a private currency. Maybe there'll be the JPM, you know, token or whatever. It's obvious that the powers that be are very big on tokenization. I wrote about that in the Morgan Report. I don't know, it's been probably about 8 months ago, how they're for real loan, for a deposit banking system where you actually do deposit money in. Uh, that's a different system than what we have, but that's a collateral based system. And if you tokenize all the blades of grass, all the water, all the rocks, all the mountains, all the valleys, and all the fields in America with a token, guess what? You can probably run the scam longer, because now you have collateral that's worth, I don't know, pick a number, $100 trillion worth of land and plants and animals in America. When our debt's only 37 trillion. See? We collateralized. And it's a mind game more than anything else. But I think that may be one of the quote unquote solutions that could be, pushed out on the public. I don't know for sure. I do think about these things, obviously. But that's the idea, is to maintain their power and control. To them, the money is almost irrelevant, because the debt of 37 trillion can't be paid back, and they know it. And it's the debtor that's servant to the lender. So as long as you are in debt, they have control. And that was brought out in a movie called The International. And I agree with it, that even though you and I would care about the principal if you made a loan to your brother-in-law or your sister, or a bank, any kind of loan, you don't want your interest and your money. For them, since they could print money to infinity, all they really care about is, can you make the interest payment? Because if you can't make the interest payment or not, guess what, Venezuela? We get your oil. Guess what, Argentina? We get your silver. Guess what, Mexico? We get your oil. I'm cutting through a lot of details, but that's kind of the bottom line of how it works. You loan them money, they can't pay it back. Well, guess what? We'll make it. Well, you made the money for nothing and you're getting oil for it. Who's the winner in that?
Exactly. That was, I think that's a scenario from the actual book by John Perkins, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman as well.
Yeah, John's an awesome, awesome guy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But that was to do with countries. The same thing they're doing with us, as you just mentioned. I don't know if the audience picked up on it. They're stealing our labor for nothing. They create money out of thin air. They deposit it into your bank account. You pay taxes and you're a tax slave for the rest of your life. And then they tell you you could retire at the age of 65, which also then gets taxed. I don't know if you know, but in Australia, the government wants to tax spare bedrooms. So if you have a big enough house and you don't have bedrooms being used, they actually want to tax your spare bedroom. That's how ridiculous it's getting in some of these Western democracies. I won't even call them democracies anymore. It's getting ridiculous where the people have actually paid off all their debt and have wealth. They want to impoverish them as well because most of the 90% of the population, I think, are in too much debt. Anyways, hey, we move away from that. So let's say, for example, if I made you the head of the central bank, I don't know if you'd like to be the head of the central bank, but if I said, David, you're the head of the central bank, what's the one change you would make? Would you want to be, if you were the head of the central bank, would you make any changes? Would you do something overnight?
Oh boy. Well, that's a tough one to answer. I mean, if I was head of the central bank, to get to that position, you got to be so much in the club that I probably wouldn't be able to do anything. But let's say on a thought experiment, I'm me and I become head of the central bank. Yeah, I'd change a lot of things. First, I'd educate people worldwide to the best of my ability as simply as possible, how the system works and why it's wrong, why it's inherently immoral. And once I got that broadcast out for a couple of weeks, I think I would change it back to what we talked about earlier. Let's keep all the buildings in place, keep the employees in place, but let's run it like a public utility. And then I think I would slowly bring in honest money into the system slowly over time that perhaps if you deposited real money, I'm saying real deposit, and got a receipt for it, you would get the interest basis, the growth in the money supply. So silver's money supply continues to go down. It's in a deficit. The gold runs at about a percent or percent and a half per year. So maybe you could offer 1% a year, very low interest rates, but that's how the money supply expands at that rate over an average. And I think once you got back to value for value, labor for real good, like gold, silver, and you could do it in paper money theoretically, but let's just leave on this path. And then I would just simplify it, and I would simplify it as that took place. Again, making it public utility, people should get paid for their labor, but they don't have to create something for nothing. So I think you could slowly mitigate the paper situation over time, but it would be very, very difficult. And there'd be people that would be so good at a propaganda campaign to prove that, gold standard doesn't work and it's archaic and it wouldn't work. It might have worked in days gone by, but it can't work now. I mean, there would be so much pushback. I mean, the best pushback we can talk about is what we know for a fact. Lincoln wanted to change the system to greenbacks. He was assassinated. John F. Kennedy came out with the United States note, not a Federal Reserve note, got on my desk drawer. He was assassinated. I mean, you go against the bankers, you usually have a short lifespan. So, I probably have a short life.
Yeah. I should have said maybe you would have been the president. Would you dissolve the Fed or just get rid of the Fed completely? But it does serve some kind of utility, as you said, as long as it's a public utility and it's there. My understanding also was obviously I've read the book about the Federal Reserve and how it was set up, but I've also heard some historians say that was set up actually because of the banks failing, and they were only supposed to bail out the banks in case there was a run on the banks, which happened during the Great Depression. But then the governments actually turned it around, and the government during the war said, hey, you got to buy our paper. So there were liquidity problems, and the Federal Reserve was only set up to buy commercial paper, not government bonds and government debt. At least that's what I've heard from a couple of people. Um, but I don't think we could abolish it overnight as well, because the whole global system would just collapse the next morning if I think we just got rid of the Fed as well. So as you said, slowly got to unplug it, take people off the drug slowly, otherwise they're all going to collapse. Hey, let's talk about obviously the real money. That's why they call you the silver guru as well. But um, let's talk about gold and silver, and where do you see they are? I know gold starts off the commodity cycle. Do you think this is a bigger commodity cycle, and what's your view on gold?
I don't really think it's a bigger commodity cycle, although I'm pretty favorable to copper. The reason I'm not seeing this as a super commodity boom, and many are, is that the global economy is contracting, not expanding. And we're getting more and more or less, of a global community and more into nationalism. Like, well, these mines are on my land and therefore, I'm going to nationalize them as an example. So you're seeing a trade breakdown. And what happened during the illness, you see some supply lines that got curtailed. Most have come back. But the point is, you can't have a commodity boom without a growing population. And our population really hasn't grown that much in several countries. So we do have a situation where uh, we need more stuff, obviously food wise, and it's not because it's many problems. Some are weather, some are growing conditions, weather. Others are arbitrary with the administrative controls of you can or cannot grow a certain crop, or you're only allowed to have such and such GMO foods planted and not others, and you can't save your seeds, and on it goes. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. But what happens at the end of these great inflations is the top tier of the commodities come out on top, and that's gold and silver. So that's what we're seeing now with this run to gold and run to silver that's taken place over the past, I guess you could say, several months, say a few months for silver. And this is a precursor to a scramble to find what's valuable and what can be trusted as the system breaks down further. And that's why you're seeing it go here. Now you could definitely, have wheat or lumber or cotton or cocoa or any of the commodities, as long as you could store them and not let them degrade, they have value, obviously. But it's not the way to play it, in my view, outside of maybe agriculture, because of so many problems in the structures built into the food supply. But I'm not seeing a general boom like we saw from, let's say, 2000 to 2020 in China, where just unbelievable records of copper, concrete, lumber, steel, you name any commodity you want, tin, nickel, copper, anything, just because it was an insatiable appetite for the Chinese infrastructure to build out from where they were in the year 2000 to where they are in the year 2025. I mean, think about the amount of cities and transportation systems and all. Just incredible. That was the super cycle. I don't think we're going to get there. Not for a while.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, what some people, some commentators might say ghost cities, but what I understand is China's actually built the infrastructure at least. I was in Australia in banking, and obviously the commodities were booming, and yeah, Australia was just shipping off everything off to China, and that is why the Australian currency was doing quite well back then as well. But I tend to agree with you. It's not a bigger commodity super cycle because, as you said, there's demographic problems in Western countries as well as China. The population's reducing quite a lot as well, especially after, let's just say, whatever happened in 2020, the virus. Populations are reducing globally. You mentioned something about GMO foods as well. So I think gold and silver, being monetary metals, are sensing out or sniffing out that the financial system is coming to its natural end, and the powers that be can't kick the can down the road anymore. But let's say we're talking about gold and silver. Obviously, I know silver, there was a seminal moment recently, which I want to discuss why it started going off. But gold, the moment was after Russia's assets were frozen. Did you think that had a very big impact on gold taking off with the central banks taking buying more gold? And do you think there's a lot more upside to it?
Well, it's a seminal moment in financial history that should probably be one of with the 3 gold stars on it is probably the most not only the most important blunder financially in the last decade, but probably one of the biggest financial blunders in the last 50 or 100 years. When you have a nation state and you null and void its money of 300 billion, you say it's no good. You just send a message to the entire world that they might do that to me. Who's to say if they don't like my politics and I'm, Turkey or I'm India or I'm, Canada, whomever. I mean, United States, that was the biggest financial blunder in my view in decades. And they're paying a price because so what happened?
Do you think the powers about did not understand that? Do you think it was intentional or it was just Bidenomics, the stupid
Well,
Bidenomic
that's a
policy?
much deeper question, and that one's, up for debate. But personally, very little happens in politics by mistake. So the top dogs might have been winking their one eye at each other, if you catch my drift. But, planning ahead and making it, someone like me, commentator, talk about what it did to the system is it either it put in distrust, whether it was real or contrived, you could argue, but it did put distrust in the system. So what happens? The bankers decide they're going to start buying gold, and now their holdings in gold on a basis of value on their books is a greater portion than U.S. debt, which U.S. debt was considered to be sacrosanct. That was the most important, safest holding you could have is U.S. debt. And now it's gold. Well, gold lasts forever and has proven itself over thousands of years. Any contrived debt on a fiat system always collapses. So, geez, what a wonderful thing to come to light. You mean gold's going to last longer than an artificial debt-based Ponzi scheme? What a concept. But yet we pretend like the US bond is still, something very valuable, very safe, very liquid, and we keep playing the game, but the game's coming to an end. There's little doubt about
There's definitely coming to an end. But when I was talking about that system as well, me growing up in India, gold is seen as money, gold and silver, but gold is the primary wealth asset. And Latin American countries and countries like China and East Asia as well, because they know their governments default, their governments lie, they tax, and there's a lot of corruption as well. Whereas I think in Western countries, people have just been spoiled to an extent because of the stability that goes with the monetary system, and now they're learning the hard way where the system is collapsing and people are wondering why the dollar's not buying enough. But having said that, do you think, obviously, Trump has hinted gold a couple of times? Because I think his tweet out there was, he who has gold makes the rules. I don't know if that was a mistake because he's never brought it up ever since. But even Scott Bessent once said we can monetize the assets out of our balance sheet. Do you think America, no, let's, maybe they have the gold at Fort Knox, maybe they don't, but do you think they could monetize their gold if they wanted to? Or is that a no-go zone?
it. I think so. I think they could. I mean, the short, very broad brush stroke of, monetary history is fiat failure, back to gold, fiat push it off the gold standard, go back to fiat, fiat fails, go back to gold. I mean, again, very broad brush, but when you have a stable monetary system, you look at Sir Isaac Newton. I mean, what happened in the Bank of England? I mean, you know, they were in chaos, and basically Sir Isaac Newton put them back on a gold standard. And that's why he became Sir Isaac Newton. It wasn't for his brilliant mind in physics. It was because he put him on a gold standard. That's why they knighted him. So, uh, history suggests that, yes, we'll have some type of tie to gold again to stabilize the system as it unwinds further. And I think, in my opinion, that must be done before an all out, failure. I mean, you don't want it to be Venezuela where the currency is in the gutter and no one picks it up. It's so worthless, right? Or Zimbabwe. Then you won't get there. in the U.S. I really believe that will not happen. You will, because the way the system is structured, with the bond markets being as they are and the sovereign debt being so quote unquote valuable, and it's pervasive for the world economy. So there's a governing factor, and that is interest rates. So when interest rates go high, the bond market worth less. So that's deflationary. So if we say, well, this paper is almost worthless and I need, 20% on it in order to hold on to it, like they do in some of the Latin American countries and, less developed countries, people hold it. They're getting a high interest rate. They don't know what else to do. But that kind of interest rate today would ruin the whole system. So you really couldn't do it. But as a thought experiment, if you put the interest rate high enough for people to trust the currency, think of what that would do to the value of the bond market. You had that high interest rate, those bonds would have to be discounted a huge amount. I can't do the math in my head, but $1,000 bond might sell for, $400 or something. So you've lost 60% of your principal, the most safest investment that exists, sovereign debt to the United States. That's what happens when the system works.
It actually works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what happened after COVID as well, when the Federal Reserve started increasing interest rates and banks started going bust in the US because of that, because their balance sheets were upside down. But David, do you think maybe the BRICS countries might actually realize what's going on and they might introduce, well, some commentators said that they're not going to use gold or silver as backing the currency, but obviously they'll just use gold for settlements, which we can see is happening with quite a few countries setting up settlement systems as well, China and Russia. What are your views on that?
I'm convinced that the BRICS have done something significant to mitigate a U.S. dollar failure. And really what we know they've done for a fact is that they have decided to trade each other's pieces of paper. Because really it's a belief system. It's no intrinsic value, but we all bank that way. We all trade that way. I mean, I might go out and get lunch today and I know that paper was printed for next to nothing, but the guy I give it to is going to accept it and I'm going to get a meal, So on that basis, the BRIC said, okay, I'll take the rupee for this. I'll take the yuan for that. I'll take the peso for this. And so they're trading amongst each other and circumventing the dollar altogether, which is kind of brilliant. It's really trade for trade, and they're using money instead of Chinese goods for Argentina goods, and making a barter, because money does make it far more efficient. But instead of having to go through the U.S. dollar to get to go in the monopoly game, you use your own currency, and that makes it far more efficient and not nearly as dependent on the dollar. Now, whether the tide of gold or not takes place, there's arguments on both sides. I've looked at it. I haven't looked at it real hard lately to see if there's any changes. But last time I did take a deep dive, that's more talk than action. Now, whether they do that at some point, it could. If it were me and I was an advisor to the BRICS, I would not tie it to gold until it was necessary to tie it to gold, which would be after the dollar was on its, in the emergency room on life support. When the dollar goes to life support, then I'd probably say, okay, we're trading these currencies, but additional to that, we have make up a name that's going to be gold backed, and that will be for stability purposes. Kind of like what happened at Bretton Woods. I mean, it was a dollar system, but the dollar was convertible to gold at $35 the ounce for then and forevermore. Oh, wait a minute. We're printing too many pieces of paper. We can't convert it $35. Why? Because we lied. We did not adhere to the contract that we promised the world. That's why. But no one wants to say that. It's it's the speculators that are ruining the gold tied to the US dollar. Yeah, right.
That's what Nixon said. Yeah. It's the fault of the speculators. It wasn't the fault of the US government doing what they did, and that's why obviously they cut the link to the gold. But obviously, I've heard Jim Ricard say something along the lines of, doesn't even need to be backed by gold. It's just a settlement that needs to happen in gold, even if they settle every 3 to 6 months. Just a debit credit, and then just work out the difference. and then settle that in gold. It just moves from one vault name to the other vault name. As in, if Russia has the surplus, China just transfers over the gold to Russia's ownership. And I think they're setting up some of these vaults in Dubai, I think Singapore, and some in Shanghai as well, at least from the research that I had done. And did you? I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that at all.
Oh, not really. Just you're right. They're building a lot in Hong Kong. And of course, the Shanghai Gold Exchange has certainly gained ground and gotten more vibrant and continues to grow. And it becomes, I think it will become the more trusted source eventually. I think it'll be more trusted than the LBMA in London or the COMEX in New York. I think that you're going to have a situation where the most trusted source of gold trading will be in the East, not in the West.
Yeah. And now let's go to your favorite topic, obviously silver, because that's like a sister or the little brother of gold. I know the seminal moment that I mentioned for gold. I think the seminal moment that I saw recently was Russia just making an announcement saying that they're going to put silver as a strategic metal or strategic financial asset. For me, at least, that was the trigger. And then I've seen silver go off. The floor is all yours, Mr. Morgan. Please tell us more.
Well, I think that it is an important situation. I think that the move that Russia made signaled to the world that it's an important asset, so important that we want to stockpile some. And then, of course, you've seen Saudi Arabia bought some SLV, almost 1 million shares, so they've got and then you have India, of course, is buying silver at a massive rate. And lastly, the United States government put it on the critical minerals list, which will put pressure on the United States to buy it, to stockpile it. So the stockpile that started the Silver Eagle program was 139 million ounces. So what's the right amount of silver to stockpile for a critical mineral? I don't know. I don't know. They don't know either. I don't know how they'll come up with a number, but let's just say, for example, that it was 140 million ounces. Go back to where it was. Well, that's like 17% of the money supply, or I should say the silver supply on an annual basis. So that's significant buying that would take place. It's like double, not quite double what the usual average is for silver purchases on the retail side, which is roughly rounded 200 million ounces a year. So if you add another 140 million ounces, you haven't doubled it, but you've increased it. And that's real silver. It can't be, you know, a warehouse receipt. It's got to be stockpiled. So I think it will have an impact. And I think more than the impact of that, which is, of course, significant or could be significant, it's an impact on consciousness. It's when people wake up and say, wait a minute, why does Russia want silver? Why does Saudi Arabia want silver? Why is silver a critical mineral? Or why is the U.S. government buying silver? And all those play into the few of us that are in the what I call hard money movement, honest money movement, gold and silver nuts, bugs, whatever you want to call us, I don't care. It's a philosophical determination, in my opinion. It's not about gold and silver. It's about what's honest and what isn't, what's truthful and what isn't. Gold is nothing magical. It's been magical for 5,000 years, but it's a policeman on the currency. It stands as a guard on the amount of money creation. You can only create what actually exists, what a concept. And so it's a policeman. So when we went from gold in coin form traded amongst each other and decided to make a warehouse receipt and put, you own this much gold, and put it on a piece of paper, as long as that paper was valid, gold standard worked, and it's a little easier to carry a piece of paper than a gold coin. However, that system has always been abused, thus fractional reserve banking, because the goldsmiths realized that very few people ever came back for the gold. They traded the paper and said it was easier, more convenient, and who bothers? So the goldsmiths started becoming
The banks.
to find the records, became banks, and started making themselves rich because they could run out almost 10 times the amount of gold that they actually held and put it in their own pockets, buy their own goods, buy their own buildings, buy whatever, because no one came back and said, hey, I want to settle. And then that one day happens and there's a run on a bank and says, wait a minute, I want this paper turned into gold, like what happened under the Nixon administration. Hey, you guys promised me this. I'm going to take you up on your promise. Oh, wait a minute. We can't do that. Why not? Well, they're not going to say because we overprinted or we lied or didn't adhere to the contract. They'll just blame somebody else, which of course is what they always do.
Yeah. Do you think there's manipulation in the gold and silver markets?
Yeah, I wrote about that in on a Twitter feed recently. One of my friends put up that one of my other friends wanted to debate the manipulation scenario. And so rather than go through podcast or whatever, I decided to state my case and put it in a written form. So my case has always been you cannot manipulate the long-term trend. You just can't. However, within that trend, you could certainly manage the price from time to time. And so I put up a bunch of exhibits on my Twitter account at SilverGuru22. You can probably find it. And I showed you all the times that the different banks have been fined and found guilty, and people have gone to jail for spoofing the market. I mean, the biggest one known is, I think it was $920 million, which is 92% of $1 billion.
That was J.P. Morgan, wasn't it?
JP Morgan. And some people put in jail. And I went on from there. There have been several others. I document them all. I reference them all. I give you the references. So it's not phony baloney. It's all documented. And I said, those are the manipulations. But the establishment likes to say, well, no, it's spoofing. And then I go, let's quit the word game. Spoofing is manipulation. It does happen. But is it manipulated where people have to fear that the long-term trend can be controlled? No, it can't. The long-term trend for gold, right now it's gone U.S. terms, 252 to almost 4,000. So it's gone from under 5 to 47-ish. So both those markets have gone up substantially from the time the bull market started in the year 2000 and 2003, respectively. And that trend will continue till it actually stops. And what's going to stop it is probably a new system, not a high gold price, but a mitigation from the system now that's broken badly into probably a banker's dream. I hope not, but that's certainly what the calculations indicate.
Yeah. I've looked into the manipulation bit and also sometimes the court reports, the commitment of traders reports, when they have certain dates, when there's longs or shorts, suddenly you'll see spikes or you'll see sudden drops in prices. And you can clearly tell that that could be manipulation by the bullion banks. David, where do you see, let's say, in this run, obviously it's not a commodity run, but gold and silver, where do you see them going? Obviously, we are again talking US dollar terms, which I myself tell my clients, forget the yardstick, just think in ounces. But just an approximate, what do you think? How do you think the next, say, 5 years play out?
I don't think we're going 5 years. Many do. I don't know. I'll look in the camera. I don't know for sure. But usually these type of events go to an acceleration phase. And that's where I've said, you get 90% of the move in the last 10% of the time. I think we've entered the acceleration phase. If this market started in 2000, as I indicated, it's 25 years old now. What's 10% of that? 2.5 years. I think we're in that part of the scenario where we're looking at a couple years further, and gold could be in the 5,000, 6,000, maybe 10,000 range in US dollar. It's really not the price; it's a function of value. That you really want to do and able to price gold correctly is to look at what does an ounce of gold buy versus what does it buy historically. So if an ounce of gold when gold is overvalued, 1 ounce of gold buys the Dow Jones Industrial Average, we know gold is overvalued. And that's history telling us again and again. So that's 1 ounce equals 44,000. I doubt it. But what if the Dow drops to 10,000 and gold's at 10,000 and it's a 1-to-1? So that's a value to look for. I don't think it's going there. Some do. It might. I don't know. But I think, and I wrote that silver would get to 100, triple digits back in 2003. But again, I'm not looking too much at the numbers. I'm looking at gold to be priced in historical terms, that its value buys more oil, more cotton, more cocoa, more buildings, more real estate, more land than it does on average. Now, whatever that price is, that is how I'll value gold. Silver, I'll be looking more at the gold silver ratio. So the monetary ratio is 16 to 1. I'm not sure we'll get there this time. We could exceed it. We could get to 1/10 to 1. Some people think 1 to 1. I don't know. I don't think the silver market will be that strong. I think we'll get to 30 to 1, thereabouts. Once we get back to 40 to 1, 45 to 1, that's kind of the historical standard of the gold silver ratio since gold was demonetized and deemed an industrial commodity only. Not true, but that's what the powers that be call it. And most people adhere to that idea. Regardless, the idea is that once we get to 40 to 1, I'll be taking a hard look to see how gold's performing, see what the historical values are, and see what the sentiment is in the, in the population worldwide, and also what are the banks implementing or trying to implement at that time. So there's a lot to take in what I just said as far as value. But if you want to stab at numbers, I'll stab at $5,000 or $6,000, gold. I think that's about as high as you're going to see, but I don't know. Again, the number's rather irrelevant. And unfortunately, as I've said on other shows, I know you're going to ask me, that's not something to root for. That shows you that there's real storms in the financial system and it's not working correctly. And that's what we don't want. We want a system that's fair, equitable, and a level playing field for everyone. And we have anything but that now. You don't get these discrepancies in wealth until the system's ready to blow up. You don't have the billionaire class at, 0.1% or 0.01% of the world's population, and then everybody else. And that's what it's become. So it's pretty clear that the end is nigh.
Yeah, the end is definitely close. I've heard some people say if silver gets to about 30 or 40 to 1 to gold, they'd rather convert it into gold and accumulate more gold with the silver. So that's a cheaper way of accumulating more gold. Sorry. And I've also heard some people say, when do you convert gold into, as you give the ratio 1 to 1? I've heard some people say this time it might even go to 0.5 to 1.
Yeah. I don't think that's true. I mean, I said it as a metaphor. Sorry to interrupt, Farzin, but
No, no, you're fine.
I think 30 or 40 to 1, that's where I'm going to take a real hard look, and that may be it. I don't know. But that's definitely a point that I want to say. And like I said, a lot of people are thinking, oh, I'll just swap my silver for gold. And that's fine. Do whatever you want. I'm a free market thinker, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to do it, And, the gold dealer says, the last guy walked out, swapped all his silver for gold, I'm out, or whatever. I mean, things, you can't just sit back and say, you can plan, but, sometimes God laughs at your plans. It may not
Yeah, of
happen.
course. And there might be CBDCs in place by then. So you might
Yeah.
not be able to even sell or even buy gold back then. So maybe you just have to buy it now and just sit tight and hope for the whole system to collapse. And the powers that be, yeah, the whole CBDC system collapse as well. But maybe it comes to barter as well. Some people might swap their gold for property. Property is underpriced. They might swap their gold. And it's about asset allocation. Buying an asset that is underpriced and then moving into an asset that is then underpriced when your asset gets overpriced. That's how generational wealth is built, as I've told my clients as well. Hey, you've been pretty grateful with your time, and I know you have another hard meeting. Anything else you want to add just on the silver, gold, anything that we might have missed?
Just in the show notes, if you will, just put in silversunrise.tv and let people get on that website. I'll be launching the documentary probably by the end of the month. So they'll have easy access to it.
I'll definitely put all the links for you. I still got a few questions
Okay,
for you,
go
just
ahead.
quick ones. We do
Sure.
a quick fire round there, David, with most of the people I interview. So just pick one, and maybe yes, why? Okay, Bitcoin or gold? We know your answer on that one?
Gold, it's been 5,000 years history. It's on the periodic chart. Software doesn't really exist if you turn off the power.
Okay. And between gold and silver, let's say if you had to put 10,000 invest in one of those metals right now and walk away for 10 years, which one would you put that into?
It'd be silver if I had if I was financially secure, meaning uh, living more than paycheck to paycheck. I knew that my job was secure. I had a 2 or 3 year future that I knew was solid. I put it in silver. If I didn't know my future, I was scared of losing my job or whatever, I'd buy gold.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Because silver is more volatile, obviously, isn't it? Um, Generally, do you invest? Would you think about investing in commodities or the actual mining shares?
I like the mining shares. I don't discount the ETFs too much, or there's some good ones. It depends what your ideas are. But we've done better by getting into the streamers and royalty companies than just about anybody that's in my sector.
Yeah, fair enough. Hey, this is the part where we just get to know David on a personal note. One of the books you'd recommend to your friends most often?
What Has the Government Done to Our Money by Murray Rothbard.
Yes, I've heard of that. I'm still to read it. I'll put a note for that as well. Um, do you have a motto in life, David?
Not really. I would say I'll expand on that. I think how you do anything is how you do everything. I'm still working on that, but usually if you get good effort for whatever you're doing in the present moment, I think that carries over. It's more of an inner being type of thing for me, where I'm authentic everywhere and always. I'm not a different person in a banker's meeting as I am with my family or I am with a stranger. I think authenticity is really important. I think there's too much pretense. Hide behind the right watch or the right suit or the right car or the right house or the right wife, all that. Just be and be your authentic self. And then you can be truly relaxed and be of higher value. If you're being something for looking good or acting good or wanting adulation or whatever, then don't self be true. I guess that would be it. I finally got there. That would be my motto. I know self be true. That would be
Yeah.
my motto.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. What's the one thing, if you had the chance to do again, that you might do differently?
Maybe I would have lied on my paper to Washington D.C. when I was nominated to be a White House fellow. Maybe if I just wrote back the propaganda pitch, I would have gone to the White House as an intern and be able to really put the government on its head. Maybe I would have done that. I wrote a policy paper on why the Social Security system would fail, and I didn't get an interview. But I had recommendations from a two-star general, a guy that was a PhD in physics and economics that nominated me for White House fellowship, and the assistant dean of architecture became the vice president of San Jose State. So I had three really solid recommendations to get the interview, but you had to write a policy paper. And I, being me, said, yeah, the system's broken and here's how we should fix part of it. And the rejection letter, no internet in those days. The letter I got back on White House station, I should have saved it. I threw it away eventually. It had 3 typos in a 3 paragraph letter. Pretty poor coming from the White House.
Yeah, it is. Right, but the social security system in the US is collapsing now. In fact, some people say it won't even last till 2032. And most pension systems around the Western countries is failing anyway. So it goes back to what you said, being authentic and being true to yourself, which is your motto in life. So, hey, what comes of it may. At least this journey has been worthwhile, I hope. Hey, one last question that I finish with all my guests. Obviously, I have a financial consultancy called Success Simplified. So, David, how do you define success?
That's very good because I've been a self improvement type for most of my life. Just want to be the best me. And in the early days of cassette tapes, which you may have heard of, um, Nightingale Conan had a series that they would mail you every month, and I joined their deal, and you get a tape, and it would be from a different speaker on different ideas. And one of them was on success. And the idea that he gave us on success was that, again, it comes back to you. You can be a success as a janitor. And I think I gave that example. That you don't have to be a success in the eyes of your parents or the eyes of society. It's up to you what determines success. And, when you look at our actual lives, how successful are you when you wash the dishes at home? I'm assuming you don't have a maid. Maybe you do, but, just for the audience, do you do it? If you don't love what you do, then, what are you doing there? In other words, as you do anything, so you do everything. If you do your passion, which I'm doing now with you with a happy heart, why shouldn't I or couldn't I carry that happy heart into the kitchen and, wash out the coffee cups and the plates? So all I'm trying to say is success should be determined by you, not by someone external. If it's a certain amount of money and that's what you think is success, fine. Another one is from a cassette tape series called Peak Performance by Jack Canfield. He wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul, as I said, and he said it's not becoming a millionaire that's so important. It's what you learn as you become a millionaire that's a success. And I think there's a lot of merit in that statement because, to get there from zero, it takes effort, it takes time, it takes energy, but it also takes a lot of ups and downs that life throws at you, how to deal with people better, how to mitigate a problem, how to heal. You got a different attitude toward others in business than you do randomly on the street, because I've been on both, and that's my perception. But when you work at a bank or for an engineering firm, and you get a paycheck and you deposit and you have your weekends free, when you actually run a business, you're really thinking about that business often and how to make it better. And also instinctive or taught to us in the US, the customer is always right. And the customer isn't always right. Sometimes they're real jerks, but how do you mitigate that problem, right? And do it without trying to offend them, but just, to mitigate the problem. And so business teaches you a lot more about life than just, getting a job as far as I'm concerned. Not that getting a job doesn't teach you a lot, but when you're on your own and you're running your own show, then who are you going to complain to about it's not going well? Yourself, I'm not making enough sales or, whatever. So there's a lot of responsibility when you take that burden on, but there's a lot of growth as well. And that's what I'm trying to indicate. If you really want the fast track to financial and spiritual well-being, get married, start a business, and have kids. You get those three big changes in your life. You got the fast track to a spiritual path. I guarantee it.
That was a great note to end it on, David. A little bit of humor to add in there, but you're absolutely right. Starting a business, and when you're on your own, unless instead of just taking a paycheck and just daily 9 to 5 grind and keeping their system running, you're better off taking risks on your own and actually trying to make something of yourself. Yeah, you're going to fail, but failing is part of the process of success as well. So the more you fail, the more you learn. That's at least how I see it. Hey, David, anything else you want to add at all at the end? No, right? So obviously, where can people, yeah, go on.
Just go to themorganreport.com. That's themorganreport.com. Sign up for a free letter and enjoy the movie when it comes out. And thank you for having me on your program.
It's always a pleasure, and I'll get all the links and I'll add them in there for the new documentary, The Four Horsemen, also, and all of your books and the Morgan Report. Hey, David, just want to thank you for your time. It's been a great pleasure. I can now say I've spoken to the Silver Guru myself. You take care, David. Take care. All the best. Thanks a lot. Cheers.